visitor from beyond was never meant to cross a quiet sky, but a sky already burning? What if Three-Eye Atlas slipped past not in silence, but through the storm of our own sun, its invisible fire lashing Earth as it came? And what if the solar storm of 2025 was no accident at all, but alignment, a reminder that wanderers and storms often arrive together? And if you'd like, feel free to share in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and what the sky looks like above you as you listen. It's always a quiet joy to see how far this circle of night watchers reaches. What if the sun, which gives us life, also carries within it the power to undo us? Every 11 years, the solar cycle reaches its restless peak, the surface of the sun freckled with storms and flares. In 2025, the storm was fierce plasma and radiation hurled outward, twisting magnetic fields across the Earth, turning auroras into rivers of green fire. And in that same year, astronomers whispered again of Three-Eye Atlas, the fragment that crossed our system not long before, asking in hushed voices whether storm and visitor were parts of the same story. The ancients feared the sun's fire as much as they worshipped it. In Norse tales, the wolf, Skull, chases the sun across the sky, threatening to swallow it in final chaos. In China, the legend of Ho Yi tells of the archer who shot down 9 of 10 suns to save the Earth from burning. In the Aztec world, the sun itself required sacrifice, lest it fall dark and the world collapse. Solar storms, though unseen by ancient eyes, were sensed in myth. The idea that the sun could shift, falter, or rage was always part of the human imagination. Science gives those fears new language. In 1859, the Carrington event lit the skies with auroras so bright miners thought dawn had come early, while telegraph lines sparked with fire. In 1989, Quebec's grid collapsed beneath the weight of geomagnetic storms. And in 2025, the cycle surged again, this time into a world strung with satellites, networks, fragile systems of electricity and communication. The sun, restless and alive, reminded us that its fire has never ceased to reach us. And into this storm, whispers of Three-Eye Atlas returned, as if the two object and storm were mirrors of one another. The silence of the visitor set against the fury of the Sunday. The connection was not scientific, at least not yet. Three-Eye Atlas had passed years before, on its silent course. But human minds link patterns, find meaning in coincidences. What if the timing was not accident? What if visitors like it come not in isolation, but in moments when the Earth itself is most vulnerable, its skies unsettled, its systems strained, its people reminded of fragility? Perhaps the solar storm of 2025 was not only event, but omen, echoing the old tradition of reading the heavens as messages, not mechanics. And so we wondered, could solar storms mask or reveal visitors? Could their fury hide signals or amplify them? Could they be stage on which encounters unfold? The questions remained, fragile but persistent, like sparks trailing a comet's tail. Perhaps it should never have been found, because its presence, paired with the storm, forced us to ask whether we are truly alone in the silence, or whether silence is only the part of the story we have learned to hear. The sun's fire faded, as it always does, but the unease remained. For in that year, sky and mind both burned, with questions too large for easy rest. And in the quiet that followed, Three-Eye Atlas lingered not in sight, but in memory, paired forever with the storm of 2025, like flame and shadow bound together across the night. What if the storm of 2025 was not only a surge of the sun's breath, but a reminder that our world has always been fragile beneath the weight of the heavens? For as particles raced across the void, they struck Earth's magnetic field, shaking it like a drum. Lights danced across the skies of latitudes that rarely see auroras, green, violet, even crimson rivers flickering above city skylines. What if the storm itself was not accident, but a kind of cosmic performance staged in the same sky where, years before, Three-Eye Atlas had slipped silently past? Humanity has always seen meaning in lights above. The Romans called them chariots of fire, believing the heavens were alive with omens. The Sami of the far north said the auroras were the souls of the departed, swirling in colours that whispered warnings or blessings. In Japan, auroras were seen as signs of good fortune for children conceived beneath their glow. The sky on fire was never just phenomenon, it was story, symbol, voice of forces beyond human control. The solar storm of 2025 was only another page in this long tradition, but now filtered through the anxieties of a modern age. Science measures what myth once interpreted. Satellites tracked the ejections, magnetometers recorded the tremors, grids wavered under the strain. Planes were rerouted, astronauts sheltered, operators watched their screens with tense precision. For all our mastery of machines, we remain vulnerable to the moods of the star that feeds us. And as the storm rippled across networks and circuits, memories of 3i Atlas returned, as though the visitor's silence had prepared us for this new reminder of our fragility. What if its passage and the storm were chapters in the same narrative, one written not for comfort but for humility? The unsettling thought is that both storm and visitor remind us how little control we truly hold. We chart the skies, we model the sun, we send instruments into orbit, yet when plasma lashes outward or fragments drift inward, our role is not mastery but endurance. Perhaps that is why 3i Atlas should never have been found, because paired with storms like this one, it strips away the illusion of safety, reminding us that we are not fortress but island, fragile against the elements of the cosmos. And yet, the sky on fire was not only terror. For those who looked upward, away from screens and fears, there was beauty. Curtains of light shimmered across the night, ancient and ethereal, uniting strangers beneath the same wonder. People stood on rooftops, in fields, on frozen lakes, whispering awe into the cold air. And in that awe was the faintest echo of kinship, the sense that storms and visitors alike, however unsettling, bind us to the universe, reminding us that we are part of its rhythm, not apart from it. Still, the fire faded, leaving memory. Machines hummed back to order, grids steadied, news cycles turned to other fears. But the image lingered, a sky aflame, carrying both terror and beauty, silence and roar. And perhaps that is why it should never have been found, because once the visitor is paired with the fire, we cannot unsee the connection. The storm becomes more than storm, the fragment more than fragment, each echoing the other, leaving us restless in their wake. 3i Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 remain bound in memory, one silent, one blazing, both reminders of the fragility of life beneath the heavens. And perhaps their pairing is not coincidence, but chorus two voices in different tongues, both asking us to listen, to remember, to wonder what else the skies may hold. What if the storm of 2025 was not surprise, but something foretold long ago? For across cultures and centuries, people looked at the heavens and saw omens, flares of light, wandering stars, veils of fire that they believed carried warnings. What if the solar storm and the memory of 3i Atlas were less about science and more about prophecy, fulfilled in whispers and symbols we had long forgotten? The book of Revelation spoke of the sun scorching the earth with fire, a trial for humanity that would arrive not as metaphor, but as storm from the heavens. The Mayans counted their cycles with fear, believing that one age would end in fire from above. In the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, strange lights in the sky were recorded as signs of wars to come, as though auroras were messages of unrest written across the night. To them, fire in the sky was never only natural, it was revelation, a glimpse of a story written beyond human hands. The solar storm of 2025 fit easily into these old patterns. As satellites flickered, grids trembled, and skies shimmered with unnatural colour, it felt as though we were living inside the very fears of the ancients. And when the memory of 3i Atlas returned, the parallels deepened. For what is a wandering fragment from beyond, if not a star out of place, a messenger without explanation? Together, storm and visitor mirrored the prophecy's fire from the heavens, and the arrival of signs not meant to be ignored. Science, of course, explained both. Solar cycles follow magnetic rhythms, predictable in their chaos. 3i Atlas was fragment, flung outward from another system, chance rather than omen. And yet, explanation does not erase pattern. Human minds are wired for prophecy, for linking events into narratives, for searching sky and silence alike for meaning. Perhaps that is why the storm and the visitor cling together in memory, because we are unable to let go of the idea that the heavens are more than mechanics, that they still speak, even if we no longer know how to hear. Prophecies unsettle because they blur the line between past and present. If storms and visitors were seen as warnings, then every flare, every fragment, every shift in the heavens becomes charged with meaning. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because it reawakened this old way of seeing, forcing us to ask whether silence and fire are only accidents, or whether they are chapters in a story written larger than ourselves. And yet, prophecy is not only fear, it is also hope. For in every tale of fire, there is also promise of renewal. The Norse spoke of Ragnarök, fire and storm leading to rebirth of the world. The Mayans saw cycles, but also the assurance that a new sun would rise. Even Revelation ends not with ruin, but with the image of a new heaven and a new earth. The storm, then, is not only omen of doom, but reminder of continuity, fire that ends, but also begins. Still, the question lingers. Were the ancients wrong, or did they glimpse truths in symbols we no longer understand? And perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once paired with storm, it becomes too easy to see it as fulfillment, too tempting to hear prophecy in silence. 3. Atlas and the solar storm of 2025, taken together, feel like story too old to be coincidence, too strange to be dismissed. And perhaps that is their true power, not as disasters, but as reminders that even in an age of science, the heavens still burn with mystery, and prophecy has not lost its voice. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only spectacle of colour in the night sky, but reminder of how fragile our modern world truly is? For when charged particles struck the Earth's magnetic shield, their effects did not stop at auroras. They reached into the systems we have woven around us, satellites, grids, networks, straining wires, and circuits with invisible fire. What if 3i Atlas should never have been found, because its memory, paired with the storm, made us see how easily all that we have built could unravel beneath a sky that does not answer to us? On the morning after the storm's first wave, airports delayed flights as navigation systems flickered, unsure of their bearings. Farmers checked weather satellites only to find them sluggish, confused by interference. Power operators watched as currents, driven by geomagnetic shifts, surged through transformers never meant to bear such weight. For hours, grids wavered at their edges. Even in cities far from the poles, there was unease because though the lights still glowed, everyone knew how thin the margin was, how close silence had come to swallowing the hum of modern life. History offers precedent for this fear. In 1859, the Carrington event sent sparks along telegraph lines, operators startled by flames leaping from their instruments. In 1989, Quebec's grid collapsed in less than 2 minutes, leaving millions in darkness. And in 2025, we carried far more fragile cargo banking, medicine, communication, all riding invisible threads across space. The storm exposed what myth had always known, that civilization is delicate, that order depends on forces we cannot tame, and that the heavens do not bend to human will. And into this unease slipped the memory of 3i Atlas. For if storms could reach down from the sun, how easily could fragments drift in from beyond? The visitor had been silent, harmless, yet its very presence was reminder that the boundaries of our world are porous. No fortress of wires and satellites can make us secure when storms rage above and fragments pass through. Perhaps that is why it should never have been found, because its silence, remembered in the storm's roar, forced us to confront the fragility of everything we build. Yet fragility is not only weakness, it is also a reminder of resilience. During the storm, engineers rerouted power, pilots adjusted courses, astronauts sheltered behind walls designed for radiation. The systems bent, but did not break. Humanity, fragile though it is, adapts. The wires trembled, but they held, and in their trembling, we glimpsed both our vulnerability and our strength. Fragility humbles us, but it also reveals our capacity to endure. Still, the image lingers. Satellites spun through interference, grids hummed at their limits, and people looked upward with unease. The storm passed, but the question remained: how long until the next, and what will be different when it comes? And perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once its memory is paired with the storm, we cannot unsee how exposed we are, nor forget how thin the line is between light and darkness. 3i Eye Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us of the truth we often deny, that our world is small, our systems fragile, our security an illusion we maintain only until the heavens decide otherwise. And perhaps the trembling of the wires was not just warning, but invitation to remember that even in fragility, we endure, and in endurance, we find meaning. What if the greatest consequence of the solar storm of 2025 was not the trembling of wires or the strain of satellites, but the simple act of millions of people looking up at the same time? For as the night sky rippled with colour, places that had never known auroras found themselves painted in green and crimson veils, streets emptied, windows opened, cameras tilted skyward. And what if, in that same act of looking, the memory of Three-Eye Atlas returned, reminding us that sometimes what unsettles most is not the danger, but the shared wonder that refuses to be ignored. In myths across time, collective visions have always marked turning points. The Romans spoke of comets that blazed over battlefields, uniting enemies and allies alike in dread. The Chinese told of guest stars appearing in the heavens, their brilliance witnessed across provinces, recorded by many hands. Medieval chronicles describe fiery signs stretching across skies, seen by thousands, interpreted as warnings or blessings. The solar storm of 2025 entered this tradition, an event too large for one eye alone, too radiant to belong to science alone. It became story told by many voices, woven into the collective memory of an unsettled year. Science explained the storm, measured it with instruments, charted it with satellites. Yet the explanations did not diminish the awe. In cities where skies are rarely dark, people saw veils of light drift above skyscrapers. In deserts, campers stood in silence as ribbons of violet and green curled across horizons. In villages, elders told children that they had never seen skies burn so brightly. Across the world, there was a moment, brief but real, where humanity looked up together, reminded that we share the same sky. And in that unity, Three-Eye Atlas seemed to return, not as threat but as memory of another time when we looked up and wondered. The unsettling thought is that moments like these are rare and they change us. To look up is to feel small, but also connected, to see not walls or nations, but a sky that belongs to no one and everyone. Perhaps that is why Three-Eye Atlas should never have been found, because paired with the storm, it reminded us of our vulnerability, but also of our unity. And unity, though beautiful, can be terrifying, for it dissolves illusions of separation and forces us to see how fragile we all are, together. And yet, there was grace in the looking. People shared images, words, silence. Some spoke of fear, others of beauty, but all were marked by the vision. The storm, fierce as it was, left behind something the visitor alone had not a memory of awe shared across a planet. For if the silence of Three-Eye Atlas reminded us of isolation, the fire of the storm reminded us of kinship. In looking up, we were not alone. Still, the wonder carried unease. For as the colours faded and the sky returned to dark, we knew how quickly such unity dissolves. We returned to divisions, to noise, to the comfort of forgetting. And perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once paired with the storm, it binds us to a memory we cannot escape, a reminder of both fragility and belonging. Three-Eye Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 left behind more than science, more than data. They left us with the image of a world looking up together, silent and awed, reminded for a brief moment of how vast, how dangerous, and how beautiful the sky above us truly is. What if the greatest fear awakened by the solar storm of 2025 was not that the sun's fire could burn our grids or blind our satellites, but that the sky itself seemed alive and eye turned toward us, vast and watchful? For as the auroras rippled with crimson and green, it felt less like weather and more like presence, as though the heavens themselves had paused to look back. And what if, in that moment of being watched, the memory of Three-Eye Atlas returned, not as a fragment of stone, but as a silent gaze, drifting through the dark? Humanity has long feared the gaze of the sky. The Egyptians believed the eye of Ra followed humanity, scorching enemies with light. The Inca spoke of Inti, the sun god, whose glance could bless harvests or wither them in drought. Even the Greeks, in tales of Helios, warned of the sun's unblinking watch, relentless and merciless. To be seen by the heavens was never neutral, it was judgment, a tension that stripped away secrecy and exposed all. The storm of 2025, burning so brightly that night, turned today in places, carried that same unease, the feeling of being observed by forces beyond comprehension. Science framed it differently. Solar particles excite the atoms of our atmosphere, causing them to glow in sheets of colour. Instruments explained the mechanics, but the sensation remained. Those who looked upward felt it a hum beneath the skin, a sense of standing inside something vast, more alive than machine or chance. And when whispers of Three-Eye Atlas surfaced again, the connection deepened. For if the storm could feel like gaze, then what of the visitor, crossing without explanation? Was it silence, indifference, or attention we could not understand? To imagine being watched unsettles because it questions our place. If we are seen, then we are not alone. If we are not alone, then what else watches, waits, judges, or simply observes us in passing? Perhaps Three-Eye Atlas should never have been found, because once paired with the storm, it suggests that the sky is not empty stage, but audience, and we are not only observers of the cosmos, but participants in a drama we do not yet grasp. And yet, there is wonder in being seen. For to feel the gaze of the heavens is to feel part of them, to be reminded that we are not drifting unnoticed in darkness. Perhaps the storm's fire was not judgment but recognition, a fleeting acknowledgement that our small world exists, fragile and luminous beneath a star's breath. Perhaps the visitor's silence was not absence but witness, a reminder that even fragments can carry the weight of attention. Still, the unease does not fade. The idea that we are watched, even in silence, unsettles because it demands response. What do we do with the knowledge of attention? Do we hide? Do we reach back? Do we simply live, aware now of eyes we cannot see, of presences we cannot name? And perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once paired with storms of fire, it leaves us restless in the thought that we are never truly alone. Three-Eye Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that the sky is not inert backdrop, but living presence, sometimes violent, sometimes silent, but always more than emptiness. And in their pairing lies the most unsettling truth, that we are watched, and that what watches may never explain itself, leaving us to wonder what it sees in us when the heavens burn with light. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only storm, but message? For when the sky flickered with ribbons of red and green, it felt less like accident and more like signal, an alphabet written in light, a voice speaking in colour. And what if the memory of Three-Eye Atlas was not coincidence, but part of that message, silent fragment paired with roaring fire, two halves of a communication we have not yet learned to read? For centuries, humans have imagined the heavens as text. The Babylonians charted omens in the skies, tracing the rise of comets and eclipses like lines in a book of prophecy. Medieval monks recorded fiery signs and treated them as sentences from God, warnings written in flame. Even in the Renaissance, scholars debated whether comets were celestial punctuation, marks placed in the heavens to remind us of order and consequence. The storm of 2025, glowing above continents at once, echoed this tradition, reminding us that the sky has always been red as much as it has been seen. Science explains the colours of auroras as atoms struck by charged particles, each hue a reflection of oxygen or nitrogen excited by the sun's energy. Yet explanation does not erase meaning. The very fact that such beauty emerges from violence feels symbolic, like anger transmuted into wonder, destruction into spectacle. And when people saw those lights, they interpreted them in ways science cannot measure. Some whispered of endings, others of beginnings, others still of contact. And into that silence slipped the memory of Three-Eye Atlas, as if the visitor itself were word from beyond, carried alongside the storm to complete a sentence we could only half hear. Messages unsettle because they imply sender. To see the storm as signal is to wonder, from whom? From the sun itself, restless and alive? From the universe, weaving meaning into chaos? Or from intelligences beyond our world, cloaking communication in natural fire? Perhaps Three-Eye Atlas should never have been found, because once the storm is seen as message, the visitor becomes part of that message, and silence itself becomes language too deep for us to understand. And yet, there is beauty in the possibility. To imagine that storms and fragments might be messages is to imagine that we are not excluded, that the universe itself reaches toward us in strange, indirect ways. The fire in the sky becomes more than threat, it becomes conversation, one we do not yet know how to join. Perhaps the storm's voice was not warning, but invitation, its words written in light across the night. Still, unease lingers, for if these were messages, then we are children before them, struggling to read a script too vast, too alien, and if messages are real, then silence itself is answer withheld, meaning deferred. Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once paired with storms of fire, it tempts us to believe the cosmos speaks to us, and it is a terrible weight to live, always wondering what it said. 3. I Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 remain, in the end, what they always were: fragment and fire, silence and roar. Yet together they feel like message, half heard and half understood, leaving us restless in awe. And perhaps their true gift is not clarity, but wonder that in searching for meaning, we are reminded that even silence and flame can feel like language, waiting for us to learn how to listen. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not merely a scientific event, but a rehearsal for the end? For when the skies turned to fire, when satellites trembled and grids faltered, it was not hard to imagine a world unlit, a world cast suddenly into silence. And what if the memory of 3i Atlas returned then, its silent passage paired with the storm's violence, not as coincidence, but as reminder that the heavens have always carried within them the power to unmake what they have made? Across history, the fear of endings has always been written in the sky. The Norse spoke of Ragnarok, fire and darkness consuming gods and men alike, with the sun swallowed and the stars falling into sea. The Aztecs believed their age would end in fire, the heavens collapsing under the weight of flames. Medieval sermons warned that comets and auroras were signs of apocalypse, blazing across the heavens as trumpets of doom. To those who looked upward, the fire above was not spectacle, but revelation, the end pressing close. Science places these fears in context. The Carrington event of 1859 did not end civilization, though it startled telegraph operators with sparks and fire. The storm of 1989 darkened Quebec, but the world went on. The solar storm of 2025 strained our machines but left them standing. And yet, the fragility revealed was undeniable. We depend on satellites for navigation, on grids for survival, on signals for connection. A storm stronger still could undo us, not in myth but in reality. Not in fire raining from heaven, but in silence spreading across earth. In that silence, we would glimpse how thin the line is between order and collapse. And in this thought, the memory of 3i Atlas deepens the unease. For if fragments can cross our system, unbidden and unexplained, and if storms can lash us without warning, then the sky holds both silence and fire enough to unmake us. Perhaps it should never have been found, because once paired with the storm, it shows us too clearly that endings are not only myths, but possibilities, written into the physics of a universe indifferent to our survival. Yet endings are not only fear, they are also thresholds. Myths of apocalypse often carried hope of renewal. Ragnarok was followed by rebirth, revelation by a new heaven and new earth. Even in science, endings are often beginnings. A star's collapse seeds worlds with heavy elements. A planet's ruin may give rise to another's growth. The storm of 2025 ended, and life went on, though minds were changed, horizons widened. Perhaps the fear of endings is less about loss and more about transformation, about being forced to face what we are and what we may yet become. Still, the unease lingers. To live beneath a star is to live with endings hidden in its light, whether in storms or in the slow certainty of time. And perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because its silence, paired with the storm's fire, makes us see too clearly that all things end, and that our world is not shielded but suspended, vulnerable to forces we cannot control. 3. I Atlas and the solar storm of 2025. together remind us of a truth as old as myth, that endings are written above us, not only in prophecy, but in physics. And yet, perhaps their gift is not despair but perspective, the reminder that endings, however feared, are part of the rhythm of the cosmos, and that, even in endings, wonder remains. What if the true gift of the solar storm of 2025 was not the spectacle it painted across the night, nor the fear it inspired in fragile machines, but the reminder of our oldest instinct to endure? For as the sky rippled with fire and whispers of 3i Atlas returned, humanity was not only afraid, but determined. What if both storm and visitor exist not to terrify us, but to awaken the restless longing that has always carried us forward, the refusal to vanish, even when the heavens themselves seem to conspire against us? From the beginning, this longing has shaped our stories. The Epic of Gilgamesh told of a king who searched for immortality, desperate to outlast flood and time. The Egyptians built monuments of stone to ensure memory beyond death. The Greeks spoke of heroes who sought eternal fame, names carried beyond the grave. Survival was never just about bodies, it was about story, about leaving something behind that storms could not erase. And when the auroras of 2025 blazed across unfamiliar skies, people felt again that same hunger, to endure, to matter, to be more than fragile creatures beneath a sun's anger. Science reveals our vulnerability, but it also reveals our resilience. Solar storms may disrupt, but we build protection shields for satellites, grids that bend and adapt, systems that reroute power in the face of strain. 3. Atlas may drift past in silence, but its very discovery proves our eyes are sharper, our tools more vigilant. We endure not because the cosmos is gentle, but because we adapt to its indifference. And the storm of 2025, though fierce, was proof that even in fragility, we endure still. Yet the memory of the visitor unsettles that endurance. For endurance asks, to what end? To last another day, another age. But what if the universe does not notice, does not care? Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once paired with the storm, it reminds us that survival itself is not guarantee of meaning, only possibility. We long to endure, but endurance is not answer. It is only the beginning of a question. What do we do with the time we manage to keep? And yet, perhaps that is the true beauty. The longing to endure shapes everything we are. It drives us to explore, to build, to love, to imagine futures beyond endings. It turns fear into fuel, storms into lessons, silence into wonder. To endure is not to deny our fragility, but to carry it with courage, to keep going even when the heavens rage and the silence of visitors unsettles us. The storm of 2025 was not only a reminder of vulnerability, it was proof of will, of the fire that burns within us as brightly as the auroras above. Still, the question remains, can we endure forever, or are we only sparks, brief but radiant, flickering against an infinite dark? And perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because paired with the storm, it asks whether endurance is enough, or whether meaning lies not in how long we last, but in how deeply we live while we burn. 3. Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us of the truth that both unsettles and sustains us, that to live is to long for endurance, to seek permanence in a world that grants none. And yet, in that longing lies our strength, for it is in the fragile desire to last that we find our truest humanity, a flame that storms may bend but cannot extinguish. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only a disruption of machines and a spectacle of fire, but a kind of awakening? For when the sky shimmered with auroras in places unaccustomed to their glow, and when whispers of 3i Atlas returned to the collective imagination, it felt as though humanity had been nudged, reminded of something long forgotten. What if storm and visitor were not separate accidents, but part of the same gentle push, an invitation to awaken from the illusion that the cosmos is silent, indifferent, and knowable? History records many such awakenings, moments when the heavens shattered complacency. In 1054, Chinese astronomers recorded a guest star so bright it was visible for weeks in daylight, what we now know as a supernova, the death of a distant star. In 1910, Halley's comet returned, and fear spread that its tail carried poison, reminding humanity of fragility even in an age of science. In 1969, the sight of Earth from the moon awakened a new awareness that our world is small, luminous, and alone. Each of these moments unsettled and inspired, a reminder that awakening often comes as both gift and wound. Science framed the 2025 storm as solar maximum, a cycle as old as the sun itself, magnified by modern dependence on technology. 3. I Atlas was classified as interstellar object, an accident of celestial drift. Yet explanation does not quiet the feeling. For many, the storm and the visitor were awakenings, a call to see ourselves differently. We are not masters of the heavens, but participants in them, not insulated from the cosmos, but woven into it. The storm's fire and the visitor's silence together made the universe feel less empty, more alive, more insistent in its presence. Awakening unsettles because it demands change. To awaken is to see differently, and once sight is altered, there is no return to blindness. Perhaps 3I Atlas should never have been found, because once paired with storms of fire, it forces us to awaken to truths we are not ready for, that the universe is larger, stranger, and nearer than we imagined. Awakening can be burden, stripping away illusions of safety, demanding that we carry new weight of wonder and fear. And yet, awakening is also gift. It sharpens the senses, expands the horizon, deepens the mystery. To awaken is to move closer to truth, even if that truth unsettles. The storm of 2025 showed us the fire of our own star, alive and restless. The visitor showed us the possibility of journeys beyond imagining. Together, they reminded us that we are not sealed inside walls of certainty, but perched on the edge of discovery, always one step from wonder. Still, the question remains, what do we do with awakening? Do we step forward, or do we retreat into denial, pretending the storm was only weather, the visitor only stone? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because awakening is heavy, and not all are ready to bear it. But perhaps, too, it was always inevitable that the heavens would rouse us, with fire and silence alike, until we could no longer ignore their call. 3. I Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that awakening is not single moment, but ongoing rhythm, each storm and visitor a note in the same song. And perhaps their greatest gift is this: the reminder that we are not asleep in a silent universe, but awake in one, alive with presence, waiting for us to learn how to listen. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only spectacle or awakening, but warning? For when the heavens blaze with sudden fire, and when memory of 3I Atlas drifts back into thought, it is difficult not to wonder if the universe itself speaks in signs. What if storm and visitor together were less about beauty, less about coincidence, and more about caution, a reminder that the sky, for all its wonder, holds dangers we would rather not face. Warnings written in the heavens have long shaped human imagination. The Bible spoke of the sun darkened and stars falling as signs of judgment. Chinese chronicles treated comets and auroras as omens of dynastic upheaval, heaven's disapproval written in fire. In medieval Europe, fiery crosses and lights in the night sky were believed to herald famine or plague. The heavens were not silent backdrop, they were living script, warning of change, demanding attention. The storm of 2025, so fierce and so widespread, carried that same feeling, a sense that the cosmos was not merely indifferent, but insistent, as though urging us to look and remember our fragility. Science, careful and precise, explained the event in terms of plasma and magnetism, cycles and probability. It measured disruption in satellites, tracked the spread of auroras, noted the strain on grids. And yet, explanations did not quiet the unease. For the storm revealed just how exposed we are, our machines, our systems, our daily lives all vulnerable to the moods of a star 93 million miles away. And into that unease crept the memory of 3I Atlas, silent and brief, yet paired now with fire. If storms warn us of the sun's power, what do visitors warn us of? That the universe is not empty, that fragments and strangers move unseen, that chance itself can strike without pattern or mercy. Warnings unsettle because they suggest choice. To hear warning is to be asked, will we change? Will we prepare, or will we ignore until the cost is too great? Perhaps Three-Eye Atlas should never have been found because once its silence is paired with storms of fire, it forces us to see patterns where perhaps none exist, and yet patterns we cannot ignore. To treat them as warning is to bear responsibility, and responsibility is burden. And yet, warnings are also mercy. To be warned is to be given chance to act, to endure, to remember what matters. The storm reminded us of fragility, but also of resilience, of the power to adapt. The visitor reminded us of possibility, of the vastness beyond, of the humility we must carry. Together, they may not have spoken words, but they stirred the ancient instinct to listen, to prepare, to survive. A warning, even if unspoken, is gift. Still, unease lingers. Were the lights in the sky truly warning, or only our imagination weaving meaning into chaos? And if they were warning, of what? Of storms to come, of visitors yet unseen, of endings written in physics rather than prophecy? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once we begin to see warning in silence and fire, we cannot unsee it, and the skies will never again be only empty space. 3. Eye Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 remain in memory as twin reminders that the sky can dazzle, but also caution, that beauty can conceal fragility, that warnings may come not in words, but in light. And perhaps their greatest weight is not the warning itself, but the choice it leaves us with how we live, knowing the heavens may speak again. What if, when the heavens blaze, humanity's first instinct is not to measure, but to gather? What if the solar storm of 2025, with its skies painted in restless colour, stirred not only scientists at their consoles, but neighbours standing shoulder to shoulder in streets and fields, reaching for old rituals of belonging? And what if the memory of Three-Eye Atlas slipped into those gatherings as well? Silent visitor remembered not in fear alone, but in the quiet need to tell stories together beneath the fire. Across history, people have answered the sky with ritual. The Norse lit bonfires when strange lights shimmered above, as though to echo heaven's fire with fire of their own. The Maori of New Zealand sang chants beneath auroras, believing them to be ancestors dancing in the sky. In the Arctic, the Sami warned children not to mock the northern lights, lest the spirits descend in anger. Everywhere, rituals gave shape to awe, turning fear into meaning, making the incomprehensible bearable. The storm of 2025, vast and global, revived this instinct. People gathered, not only to watch, but to share, to turn spectacle into story. Science recorded data, but people recorded memories. Families drove out of cities to see the auroras. Strangers pointed upward together, laughing in disbelief at the colours unfurling above skyscrapers. Some lit candles, others whispered prayers, others simply stood in silence. Online, images and words spread like ritual in digital form, millions of voices weaving the same thread of astonishment. In this way, the storm became more than plasma and magnetism. It became human experience, ritual renewed in a modern age. And in those rituals, the memory of Three-Eye Atlas reappeared. People recalled the visitor, wondered aloud if it had been sign, omen, or companion. The fragment silence became part of the ritual too, a presence woven into the fire of the storm. Ritual unsettles because it is both comfort and confrontation. To gather beneath the sky is to admit our smallness, to share the fear that we are not in control. Yet it is also to reclaim power, to remind ourselves that we are not alone in that fear. Perhaps Three-Eye Atlas should never have been found because once its silence is remembered in rituals beneath the fire, it binds us together in ways we cannot dismiss. The visitor becomes part of our gatherings, a reminder that even in silence, there are presences that shape how we look at the sky. And yet, rituals also carry hope. They say, we endure, not alone, but together. They say, though the storm rages above, there is still warmth below. They say, meaning can be made, even when certainty cannot. The storm of 2025 left behind not only data, but countless memories of togetherness. Nights when people looked up and remembered that awe, fear, and wonder are best carried in community. Perhaps that is the true legacy of the storm, that it rekindled our oldest ritual of all, the simple act of looking upward, side by side. Still, unease lingered. For as rituals fade, daily life resumes, and the storm becomes story, not presence. And perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once it joins our rituals, it never leaves them, always waiting in the silence of the sky to remind us of nights when the heavens burned and we stood together beneath them. 3. I, Atlas, and the solar storm of 2025, together, remind us that ritual is not relic, but rhythm, a way of shaping awe into belonging. And perhaps their greatest gift is this: that even in the fire of the storm and the silence of the visitor, humanity remembers how to gather, how to share, and how to find comfort beneath the gaze of the endless sky. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only science, not only spectacle, but the seed of new myths? For as the heavens burned with restless light, and as memory of 3i Atlas returned, humanity began to speak in stories once more, tales woven in living rooms, whispered in classrooms, passed in late-night conversations beneath skies that seemed more alive than they had in generations. What if, just as comets once became omens and auroras became spirits, the storm and the visitor together were destined to enter the realm of legend? Across history, storms and wanderers have always been mythmakers. The Greeks believed Zeus hurled lightning as warning, and comets were seen as spears cast from Olympus. The Inuit told of the northern lights as torches carried by souls, guiding hunters across the frozen dark. In medieval Europe, strange lights in the sky were painted in manuscripts as battles of angels and demons. Myth was never just fiction, it was interpretation, a way of stitching the incomprehensible into human fabric. The storm of 2025, global in its reach, carried this same potential, planting images too vivid to fade without becoming story. Science, with all its clarity, could not quiet the myth-making. Children asked if the lights were messages, teachers compared them to dragons or phoenixes. Online, tales spread of the visitor and the storm as partners, one silent, one fiery, both reminders that the sky watches. Some imagined the visitor as scout, the storm as signal. Others said the storm itself was alive, a heartbeat of the sun, noticed only when strong enough to stir the earth. And though scientists wrote of magnetism and cycles, the stories grew anyway, because humanity cannot help but make meaning where awe demands it. Myths unsettle because they blur boundaries between fact and imagination. If the storm is story, then it becomes symbol, and if it is symbol, it shapes how we live. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once paired with the storm, it becomes legend, and legends are harder to dismiss than data. To carry a legend is to carry weight, to live as though the skies have intent, as though every fire and silence is part of narrative larger than our own. And yet, myths also sustain. They give names to the nameless, comfort to the frightened, wonder to the weary. A child who believes the auroras are ancestors, dancing may feel less afraid. An elder who recalls old stories may see continuity, not chaos. Myths do not replace truth, they deepen it, making the storm not only an event but a tale, something to remember and retell. And in those retellings, the visitor is woven in, silent but powerful, proof that the sky still surprises, still shapes us. Still, the question remains, what myths are being born now? Will the storm of 2025 be remembered as warning, as wonder, as omen, as gift? Will 3i Atlas be remembered as accident, or as messenger? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because its silence, bound now to fire, ensures that it will never be forgotten, never freed from the stories we weave around it. 3i Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that myth is not past but present, always reborn in the face of awe. And perhaps their greatest legacy will not be the data they left behind, but the stories they inspired, tales told in whispers and laughter, fear and hope, each carrying the truth that the sky has never been empty but always alive with meaning. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only science, not only spectacle, but the seed of new myths? For as the heavens burned with restless light, and as memory of 3i Atlas returned, humanity began to speak in stories once more. Tales woven in living rooms, whispered in classrooms, passed in late-night conversations, beneath skies that seemed more alive than they had in generations. What if, just as comets once became omens and auroras became spirits, the storm and the visitor together were destined to enter the realm of legend? Across history, storms and wanderers have always been mythmakers. The Greeks believed Zeus hurled lightning as warning, and comets were seen as spears cast from Olympus. The Inuit told of the northern lights as torches carried by souls, guiding hunters across the frozen dark. In medieval Europe, strange lights in the sky were painted in manuscripts as battles of angels and demons. Myth was never just fiction, it was interpretation, a way of stitching the incomprehensible into human fabric. The storm of 2025, global in its reach, carried this same potential, planting images too vivid to fade without becoming story. Science, with all its clarity, could not quiet the myth-making. Children asked if the lights were messages. Teachers compared them to dragons or phoenixes. Online, tales spread of the visitor and the storm as partners, one silent, one fiery, both reminders that the sky watches. Some imagined the visitor as scout, the storm as signal. Others said the storm itself was alive, a heartbeat of the sun, noticed only when strong enough to stir the earth. And though scientists wrote of magnetism and cycles, the stories grew anyway, because humanity cannot help but make meaning where awe demands it. Myths unsettle because they blur boundaries between fact and imagination. If the storm is story, then it becomes symbol, and if it is symbol, it shapes how we live. Perhaps Three-Eye Atlas should never have been found because once paired with the storm, it becomes legend, and legends are harder to dismiss than data. To carry a legend is to carry weight, to live as though the skies have intent, as though every fire and silence is part of narrative larger than our own. And yet, myths also sustain. They give names to the nameless, comfort to the frightened, wonder to the weary. A child who believes the auroras are ancestors dancing may feel less afraid. An elder who recalls old stories may see continuity, not chaos. Myths do not replace truth, they deepen it, making the storm not only an event, but a tale, something to remember and retell. And in those retellings, the visitor is woven in, silent but powerful, proof that the sky still surprises, still shapes us. Still, the question remains, what myths are being born now? Will the storm of 2025 be remembered as warning, as wonder, as omen, as gift? Will Three-Eye Atlas be remembered as accident or as messenger? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because its silence, bound now to fire, ensures that it will never be forgotten, never freed from the stories we weave around it. 3. Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that myth is not past, but present, always reborn in the face of awe. And perhaps their greatest legacy will not be the data they left behind, but the stories they inspired, tales told in whispers and laughter, fear and hope, each carrying the truth that the sky has never been empty, but always alive with meaning. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only fire in the sky, but mirror? For when the heavens glowed with restless light, and when the silence of Three-Eye Atlas returned to thought, what many saw reflected was not the cosmos, but themselves, their fears, their hopes, their unspoken questions. What if storm and visitor alike do not only arrive from outside, but awaken what already lives within us, showing us the truths we would rather not name? For centuries, the sky has mirrored humanity. When comets blazed, kings saw their crowns tremble, fearing rebellion. When auroras flared, shamans saw spirits dancing, reflections of ancestors and longings for continuity. When eclipses shadowed the sun, whole empires trembled, believing the heavens revealed their guilt. The cosmos has always been blank canvas onto which humanity projects itself, and the storm of 2025 was no different. Beneath its glow, some saw beauty, others doom, others still a quiet reassurance that we are part of something vast. The same lights reflected countless selves, each illuminated for a fleeting moment. Science explained auroras as physics, Three-Eye Atlas as trajectory, yet explanation did not erase reflection. A power worker watching transformers hum at their limits saw fragility, A child staring at violet ribbons saw magic. An elder recalling stories of ancestors saw continuity. Each gaze returned something different, as though the storm itself was a mirror turned toward humanity, showing us both wonder and unease. And in its silence, the visitor deepened this effect. It offered no answers, no meaning, only reflection of what we brought to it, a canvas more unsettling than any light. Mirrors unsettle because they reveal without judgment. To see ourselves in storm and visitor is to realize that awe and fear are born not only in the sky but in us. Perhaps Three-Eye Atlas should never have been found, because once paired with storms of fire, it forces us to confront ourselves. The silence of the fragment becomes our silence. The fire of the storm becomes our longing. And in that reflection, we face questions without escape. What do we fear most? What do we hope for? What do we see when the heavens burn and the dark grows strange? And yet, reflection is not punishment, it is opportunity. To see ourselves in the mirror of the skies, to grow, to recognize the depth of our longing and the shape of our fears. The storm of 2025 reminded us that fragility is real, but also that resilience glows within us. The visitor reminded us of our smallness, but also of our reach, our ability to notice even fragments drifting through infinity. In the mirror above, we find not only anxiety, but courage. Still, unease lingers. For mirrors do not flatter, and the reflections they show are not always kind. What if the storm revealed not unity, but division? Not resilience, but dependence? What if the visitor revealed not wonder, but loneliness? The aching truth that we search the sky for kinship and find only silence. Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because its silence, bound to storm's glow, forces us to face the reflections we might prefer to forget. 3-Eye Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that the sky is not only above us, but within us, mirror and mystery both. And perhaps their greatest gift is this, that in looking upward, we are compelled to look inward, to see that awe and fear alike are our own creation, written in fire, silence, and the restless gaze of humanity upon the heavens. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only weather of the cosmos, but thread of destiny? For when the sky burned with crimson veils and green fire, and when the silence of Three-Eye Atlas drifted once more into memory, it was difficult not to wonder whether these were random accidents, or whether they were woven into some pattern larger than ourselves. What if storms and visitors alike were not chance, but reminders that humanity, too, has a place in a fabric of fate we cannot yet see? Destiny has always been read in the heavens. The Babylonians traced the courses of stars, believing they revealed the fortunes of kings. The Greeks imagined the Moirai, the fates, spinning and cutting the thread of every life, their loom reflected in the turning sky. In the Renaissance, astrologers charted the movements of planets, certain that destiny itself was written in their paths. Each age sought in the heavens the shape of its future, and the storm of 2025, paired with the wandering memory of Three-Eye Atlas, revived that old suspicion that what unfolds above is not random, but necessary, threads crossing in a story still unfolding. Science, steady and patient, speaks instead of cycles and probability. Solar storms arise from the sun's magnetic restlessness, flares, and ejections that follow rhythms older than humanity itself. Interstellar objects drift through, pulled and deflected by gravities indifferent to us. And yet, the feeling persists. When auroras appear in skies unaccustomed to them, when fragments from beyond sweep silently past, it feels less like accident and more like alignment, as though destiny itself had chosen to reveal its hand. Destiny unsettles because it strips away choice. If storm and visitor are woven threads, then what freedom remains? Are we guided toward awakening, toward ending, toward some purpose we cannot refuse? Or are we only imagining patterns where none exist, weaving meaning because we cannot accept chance? Perhaps Three-Eye Atlas should never have been found because once paired with the storm, it tempts us to see fate where there may be only physics, and to live as though the cosmos has intentions it does not. And yet, destiny also comforts. To believe events are part of a thread is to believe we belong, that our lives are not isolated sparks, but woven into a greater whole. The storm becomes not only warning, but sign. The visitor becomes not only silence, but messenger. Even if destiny is imagined, it can steady us, giving meaning to awe and fear alike. For in seeing pattern, we also see place, and place brings peace. Still, unease lingers. If there are threads of destiny, who weaves them? Is it the sun, restless and alive, whose storms shape our days? Is it the vastness beyond, scattering fragments like messages through the dark? Or is it ourselves, weaving patterns into silence and fire because we cannot endure the thought that the universe does not notice us at all? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once destiny is imagined, it cannot be unimagined, and the skies will always feel like loom, weaving stories that bind us whether we believe in them or not. 3. Atlas, and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us of destiny's dual face, burden and comfort, illusion and truth. And perhaps their greatest legacy is not certainty of fate, but the endless questioning they inspire. Whether we are chosen, whether we are drifting, or whether in looking up, we are always, inevitably, weaving ourselves into the fabric of the heavens. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only a reminder of cycles, but the spark that rekindled prophecy? For when the heavens glowed with fire, unfamiliar to most living eyes, and when whispers of 3i Atlas returned with it, some began to wonder if this was not mere coincidence, but foretelling an ancient rhythm, speaking once more, hinting at futures we dare not yet name. What if the storm and the visitor were not only events, but omens, carrying within them fragments of tomorrow? Prophecy has always been tied to the sky. The oracle at Delphi read signs in smoke and flame, claiming Apollo's voice. Mayan priests traced Venus and warned of war when it rose at dawn. Medieval chronicles tell of fiery swords and crosses in the heavens, written as warnings of plague, famine, or the fall of kings. Every culture, in its own way, looked upward and saw the future written in fire. The storm of 2025, so bright and sudden, carried that same energy. People read it as more than event, as symbol of something approaching, though no one agreed on what. Science charted solar cycles, spoke of probabilities, and reassured that storms pass. Astronomers placed 3i Atlas into its trajectory, mapped its silence across the stars. Yet prophecy ignores explanation. In churches and temples, sermons tied the storm to scripture. In online forums, voices declared it sign of contact, a herald of change. Even in quiet homes, parents whispered to children that they might live through endings or beginnings foretold in lights. The human need to frame future in the language of prophecy revived, as though the heavens had opened once again to speak. Prophecy unsettles because it removes the comfort of randomness. If the storm was prophecy, then its fire carries message. If the visitor was prophecy, then its silence carries weight. And what messages do they bring? Are they warnings of collapse, of fragility, of a world too reliant on fragile machines? Or are they invitations to awaken, to prepare for journeys beyond our small sphere? Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once prophecy is tied to fragment and fire, the heavens can never again be seen as neutral. Every flare, every wanderer becomes potential message, every silence a script waiting to be read. And yet, prophecy also inspires. It stirs imagination, fills the unknown with possibility, drives humanity to prepare, to question, to look forward. The storm of 2025 may not have promised future in words, but it lit a fire of expectation. The visitor may not have spoken, but its silence was treated as sign. Even false prophecies can shape destinies, guiding choices, planting seeds of change. In this way, both storm and visitor became more than events. They became futures, imagined but powerful. Still, unease lingers. For what if prophecy is nothing more than reflection, humanity projecting its fears and hopes into the sky? What if the storm was only weather, the visitor only stone, and prophecy only the echo of our longing? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once paired with fire, it forces us to question whether prophecy comes from the heavens or from ourselves. And in that questioning, certainty dissolves. 3i Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that prophecy is not about accuracy, but about meaning. Whether omen or accident, they carried us into the future of our own making, asking us to look upward and forward at once. And perhaps their true gift is this, that in their fire and silence, they revived the ancient rhythm of prophecy, reminding us that even now, the future still burns in the skies above. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only light and fire, but mirror of division? For when the heavens glowed in restless bands and the memory of 3i Atlas surfaced again, humanity did not agree on what it meant. Some called it omen of doom, others whispered of hope, and still others dismissed it as nothing but accident. What if the storm and the visitor together did not unite us in awe, but revealed the fault lines of belief that have always run beneath us? Division has always followed the heavens. When Halley's comet blazed in 1910, some bought comet pills to ward off imagined poison, while others celebrated with champagne beneath its tail. When eclipses crossed kingdoms, one court saw disaster, another saw blessing. Even in antiquity, comets were read differently, depending on who gazed upon them. Victory for one king, downfall for another. The same sky was never one story but many, each shaped by fear, hope, or skepticism. The storm of 2025 followed this pattern. Dazzling lights above, conflicting meanings below. Science provided calm explanations, solar flares, magnetic fields, predictable cycles. Astronomers reminded the public that 3i Atlas was simply a fragment from afar, remarkable but not ominous. Yet explanation did not erase interpretation. Some called the storm a final warning, proof that civilization's dependence on fragile machines could not endure. Others saw it as promise, a sign that the universe was alive and speaking, preparing us for greater journeys. Still others shrugged, insisting the skies mean nothing, that awe itself is distraction. In the end, the storm became less about what it was, and more about what each person needed it to be. Division unsettles because it fractures what should unite. The storm should have been shared wonder, yet it became mirror of our disagreements. The visitor should have been silent marvel, yet it became battleground of meaning. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once paired with the storm, it forced us to reveal ourselves, to show how even awe divides, how even silence can spark argument. The heavens became stage, but the performance was ours, filled with contradiction. And yet, division is not only wound, it is also depth. For in disagreement lies vitality. One voice says doom, another says hope, and between them, new questions are born. The storm of 2025 invited not uniformity, but dialogue. The visitor, not consensus, but curiosity. Perhaps the cosmos speaks not in single truth, but in chorus of interpretations, each partial, each flawed, yet together weaving the richness of human response. In division, we see not failure, but complexity, the many ways humanity strains to make sense of mystery. Still, unease lingers. For what if division itself is the warning? What if the storm revealed not only fragility of machines, but fragility of unity, the way awe itself fractures under pressure? What if the visitor's silence shows us that meaning is not given, only contested, and that our greatest challenge is not survival of storms, but survival of ourselves? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once tied to fire, it exposes us, and what it exposes is not always comforting. 3i Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that the sky is never one story but many, each gaze shaping it differently. And perhaps their greatest legacy is this: that even in division, the act of looking upward binds us, if not in agreement, then in shared wonder, proving that the sky's mystery is vast enough to hold every interpretation, every fear, and every fragile hope. What if the solar storm of 2025, with all its fire and silence, was not only a reminder of division, but an invitation to seek unity? For when the heavens glowed in unfamiliar colour and whispers of 3i Atlas stirred unease, many began to look beyond argument, reaching instead for what binds us. What if storm and visitor alike were not only tests of interpretation, but calls to remember that humanity, however fragile, endures best together? History holds many moments when the sky inspired unity. After the Tunguska event of 1908, strange though it was, people across Siberia gathered to share tales, turning chaos into common memory. When Apollo 8 sent back images of Earth rising above the moon, the photograph stirred a generation into a sense of shared planet, fragile and alone. Even during eclipses, when fears and myths swirl, people gather shoulder to shoulder, looking up in wonder at the same shadow crossing the Sunday. The storm of 2025 carried that same potential. Millions looked up, divided in meaning, but united in gaze. Science gave grounding, data, and explanation that steadied nerves. Astronomers, power engineers, and researchers across nations collaborated, measuring the storm's impact, shielding fragile systems, sharing information with uncommon speed. In that cooperation lay unity, a reminder that survival in a restless cosmos requires collective effort. The visitor, too, called for collaboration, shared data, shared telescopes, shared vigilance to watch the skies. In these acts, unity was not philosophy, but necessity, proof that awe and fear alike can become fuel for cooperation. Unity unsettles because it demands humility. To unite, we must surrender the illusion of complete certainty, accept that no single interpretation holds all the truth. The storm's fire was too vast to belong to any one story, the visitor's silence too deep to be claimed by one voice alone. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once remembered alongside the storm, it reminds us that unity is fragile, always fragile, and yet always waiting to be chosen. To seek unity is to admit that alone we are small, together we are less small, and that is truth both humbling and profound. And yet, unity is also strength. The storm of 2025 revealed our shared vulnerability, but in doing so, revealed our shared resilience. Lights flickered, but cities endured. Systems strained, but cooperation kept them standing. The visitor, too, was silent testament that discovery itself is collective, not the achievement of one mind, but of countless eyes and instruments, linked across borders. The fire and the fragment together remind us that unity is not dream, but practice and act renewed, each time humanity chooses to face the sky as one. Still, unease lingers, for unity is fleeting. After the storm fades, after the visitor drifts beyond reach, arguments return, divisions reopen, the shared gaze fractures back into private stories. What if the storm's unity is only temporary? A spark soon lost in the noise of daily life. What if the visitor's silence unites us only for a moment, before being buried in forgetfulness? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once paired with storm, it teaches us unity's impermanence, reminding us that togetherness is as brief and fragile as auroras themselves. 3. Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that unity is not permanent state, but fleeting flame, rekindled whenever the sky unsettles us. And perhaps their greatest gift is this, that even in division, there remains the possibility of gathering, of facing the unknown side by side, and of remembering, if only for a night, that we belong to one another as much as we belong to the sky. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only a reminder of awe or unity, but of responsibility? For when the sky burned in colours unfamiliar, and the silence of 3i Atlas pressed into memory, humanity was confronted not just with wonder, but with obligation. What if storms and visitors alike do not arrive only to dazzle, but to remind us that survival in a restless universe is never given, always earned? Responsibility has often been drawn from the heavens. When ancient farmers watched the stars to guide their crops, responsibility meant tending the earth in rhythm with the sky. When sailors steered by constellations, responsibility meant lives entrusted to steady hands beneath uncertain stars. In more recent centuries, when telescopes revealed comets and collisions, responsibility became preparedness tracking, predicting, guarding against chance. The storm of 2025 sharpened that instinct. It was not enough to marvel. Satellites had to be shielded, grids monitored, systems adapted. The visitor, too, demanded responsibility, its silent passing, a reminder that we must watch carefully, for not every wanderer will pass us by without consequence. Science carried the weight plainly. Engineers worked through sleepless nights, redirecting current to keep lights burning. Astronomers shared data, mapping both the sun's fury and the visitor's path. teaching us that responsibility means not only response, but vigilance. The storm became lesson, the visitor became reminder. To live in cosmos as fragile beings requires constant attention, constant care. Awe is not passive, it demands responsibility, a burden as old as our first gaze upward. Responsibility unsettles because it removes the luxury of indifference. To accept responsibility is to admit that fragility requires action, that survival is not certain. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once paired with the storm, it reveals the truth we would rather ignore, that the universe owes us nothing, and that endurance depends not on chance, but on choice. Responsibility is heavy, heavier than awe, and it lingers long after auroras fade. And yet, responsibility is also empowerment. To accept it is to claim agency, to refuse to drift helpless beneath the sky. The storm of 2025, though fierce, did not undo us because responsibility was taken, systems held, lives adapted. The visitor, though silent, did not terrify us into paralysis. It spurred research, preparation, vigilance. In this way, both storm and fragment remind us that responsibility is not only burden, but strength, the quiet resolve that allows humanity to endure against odds the cosmos sets before us. Still, unease lingers. For what if responsibility is too heavy? What if storms grow stronger than our machines can bear? What if visitors arrive not in silence but in collision? What if responsibility demands more than we can give? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once bound to fire, it reminds us of all that depends on us, and all that may one day exceed us. Responsibility is double-edged, proof of agency, proof of limitation. 3i Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that awe is never enough. To witness the sky is to inherit responsibility, to prepare, to guard, to endure, and perhaps their greatest legacy is this, that in silence and fire alike, they pressed upon us the weight of obligation, a burden that is also our only strength, a reminder that to survive beneath the heavens is always an act of care. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only a call to responsibility, but a summons to guardianship? For when the skies glowed with fire and whispers of 3i Atlas lingered like a shadow in thought, humanity was reminded that our duty does not end with machines or systems, it extends to the earth itself, the fragile home turning beneath the restless heavens. What if the storm and the visitor alike were not warnings for our tools alone, but invitations to remember what we are meant to protect? Across history, guardianship has been born from awe of the skies. Ancient Egyptians looked to the sun as Ra's daily journey, believing their task was to honor the order he sustained. The Polynesians, who navigated vast oceans by the stars, carried guardianship for their islands, for they knew survival required care of both land and sea. Even in medieval chronicles, storms of fire were read as judgment, reminders that stewardship of the earth was bound to the heavens above. The storm of 2025, fierce and encompassing, revived this instinct, that to endure storms and strangers, we must live as guardians, not merely as survivors. Science spoke of systems at risk, satellites and grids, but many looked further. Farmers, watching strange colours dance above their fields, felt again the fragility of the soil beneath them. Conservationists tied the storm to warnings of climate, of patterns shifting beyond human control. The visitor, too, played its part, its silence suggesting that the earth, luminous and rare, is not easily replaced. That guardianship must begin here, before dreams of other worlds can mean anything. To pair storm and fragment was to be reminded, our first duty is to the home we already hold. Guardianship unsettles, because it demands more than vigilance, it demands devotion. To guard is not only to repair when broken, but to cherish before breaking. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once tied to the storm, it sharpens this truth, that survival without care is hollow, that the earth cannot simply be endured, it must be tended. Guardianship is harder than responsibility, for it requires not only action, but love, and love makes us vulnerable to loss. And yet, guardianship is also strength. To see ourselves not as owners, but as caretakers, changes the weight of existence. The storm of 2025 wild though it was, reminded us that the Earth's beauty persists, even when threatened. The visitor, drifting silent and strange, reminded us of the rarity of this world, compared to the void. Together, they invited us to stand as guardians, protectors of something fragile and luminous. In this role, we are not powerless, we are entrusted. Still, unease lingers. For what if we fail as guardians? What if the storms of the future grow stronger than our devotion, or our neglect erodes the soil beneath us before the cosmos ever tests us again? What if guardianship is more than we can bear, and the very earth we protect becomes casualty of our own inattention? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once tied to the storm, it deepens the reminder of our duty, leaving no room to hide from what must be carried. 3. Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that guardianship is not distant dream, but present necessity. And perhaps their greatest gift is this, that in fire and silence alike, they returned us to the truth that the earth is not fortress, but garden, fragile yet enduring, waiting for us to finally understand what it means to stand as its guardians beneath the restless sky. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only a summons to guardianship, but a reminder of legacy? For when the sky burned in restless fire and the silence of 3i Atlas threaded through thought, humanity was pressed to consider not only survival in the moment, but what memory, what preparation, what stories would be left for those who come after. What if storms and visitors alike remind us that each generation is not end of a chain, but link, responsible for what endures when we are gone? Legacy has always been tied to the heavens. The builders of Stonehenge aligned stones with solstice, leaving behind not only monument but map of sky, a gift of knowledge to descendants. The Mayans carved their calendars into stone, etching cycles of stars to outlast kingdoms. In medieval Europe, chroniclers recorded comets and eclipses, hoping future generations would read their warnings and understand. Each age sought to pass on what it had seen in the heavens, to turn fleeting awe into durable legacy. The storm of 2025, dazzling but brief, carried the same impulse, to make sure its fire would not be forgotten, that lessons learned would outlast the lights themselves. Science preserves legacy in its own way. Measurements stored in archives, simulations refined, precautions improved. The visitor, too, became part of this archive. Its path, its silence, its fleeting presence, etched into data humanity, will carry long after memory fades. But legacy is not only numbers. It is the stories told of where we were, what we saw, what we feared, and how we endured. Children who watched auroras dance over cities will tell of it as long as they live. Parents who explained 3i Atlas as messenger or fragment will pass those interpretations on. Legacy is more than record, it is inheritance of awe. Legacy unsettles because it asks us to think beyond ourselves. To build legacy is to admit that we are temporary, that what matters most may not serve us but those who come after. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once tied to the storm, it sharpens the demand of legacy, pressing upon us the truth that we cannot hoard awe or knowledge. We must pass it forward. Silence becomes burden, fire becomes expectation, both asking what we will leave behind. And yet, legacy is also hope. To create legacy is to believe that there will be someone after us to receive it, that humanity will endure storms yet to come, will watch skies yet to change. The storm of 2025, though brief, became seed for new generations, inspiration for children who may one day study stars, warning for societies who may one day face stronger storms. The visitor, too, became legacy proof that the universe is not closed, that wanderers still pass, reminders still arrive. Together, they gave not only moment but momentum, urging us to carry forward what we learned. Still, unease lingers. For what if legacy is ignored or lost? What if storms strip away our records, or visitors pass unnoticed by those too distracted to look? What if the chain of memory breaks, and what we endure is never passed on? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once its silence is tied to fire, it demands legacy, and the weight of that demand may exceed our will to carry it. 3. Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that legacy is not optional. It is the quiet thread tying us to those who will gaze at the same sky long after we are gone. And perhaps their greatest gift is this, that they asked us not only to endure, but to remember, to record, and to pass on, so that the awe of fire and the silence of visitors will never vanish, but live on as inheritance beneath the restless heavens. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only spectacle and legacy, but lesson in vigilance? For when the skies burned with restless fire and the memory of 3i Atlas lingered like a shadow, humanity was reminded that awe cannot end with wonder, it must continue in watchfulness. What if storms and visitors alike do not arrive simply to be admired, but to remind us that the cosmos is never still, and that survival depends on eyes lifted to the heavens long after the lights fade? Vigilance has always been born of the sky. Babylonian priests, perched atop ziggurats, recorded movements of planets night after night, convinced that their observations held the key to survival. Chinese astronomers tracked comets and guest stars with care, leaving records so detailed that modern science still learns from them. Polynesian navigators, watching stars from canoes at sea, kept unbroken memory of constellations as lifelines across the ocean. For millennia, vigilance was not luxury but necessity, and the storm of 2025 rekindled this ancient instinct. Keep watching, for the heavens are never silent. Science formalizes vigilance. Satellites monitor the sun, tracking its pulses, its flares, its winds that lash at Earth. Observatories scan the skies for fragments and wanderers, mapping their paths before they come too close. The visitor 3i Atlas entered this vigilance, a reminder that not every wanderer announces itself in time. The storm, too, became lesson. To prepare before fire arrives, to shield before silence becomes impact. Vigilance is not reaction, it is anticipation, the quiet discipline of watching even when nothing stirs. Vigilance unsettles because it never ends. To remain vigilant is to live without closure, always expecting the next storm, the next visitor, the next silence that may matter more than the last. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once tied to the storm, it ensures that vigilance can never relax, that eyes must remain open even when skies seem calm. To find wonder in silence is one thing, to carry vigilance through silence is another, heavier and unyielding. And yet, vigilance is also resilience. It means we are not helpless before the unknown, that we can prepare, adapt, endure. The storm of 2025 did not undo us, because vigilance caught its signs early and systems were strengthened in time. The visitor passed without harm, but vigilance turned its silence into knowledge, a warning stored for future use. Vigilance transforms fear into readiness, awe into discipline, silence into preparation. It is the quiet thread that links awe to survival. Still, unease lingers. For vigilance is fragile, it depends on memory, discipline, attention. What if we forget, grow careless, turn our gaze downward again? What if storms arrive when we no longer watch, or visitors pass unnoticed until too late? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once tied to storm, it condemns us to vigilance without end, a burden humanity may not always be willing to carry. 3i Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that vigilance is not paranoia, but necessity, the calm and patient gaze that keeps us ready for the sky's next story. And perhaps their greatest gift is this, that they drew us back to the heavens, not only in awe but in attention, teaching us that to live beneath a restless sky is to remain awake, always watching, always waiting, guardians of both silence and fire. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only a reminder of vigilance, but blueprint for preparation? For when the heavens burned with unearthly colour and the silence of 3i Atlas pressed itself into thought, humanity realised that to watch the sky was not enough. What if storms and visitors alike were not merely warnings, but drafts of what must one day be built, an architecture of endurance strong enough to meet the unpredictable weight of the cosmos? Preparation has always been shaped by the heavens. When ancient Egyptians designed temples, they aligned them with solstices, preparing their rituals for the cycles of light. Medieval sailors studied stars, preparing charts that made oceans navigable. In the modern age, observatories, satellites, and power grids themselves are forms of preparation, built not only for utility, but for resilience against the unseen. The storm of 2025 sharpened this lesson. Flickering lights and strained circuits revealed that vigilance alone cannot preserve us. We must design systems to bend, but not break when fire comes. Science became builder of this architecture. Engineers spoke of hardened satellites, grids shielded against geomagnetic storms. Communication lines strengthened. Astronomers mapped the paths of wandering objects, weaving early warning systems from data and telescopes. And the visitor, 3i Atlas, became symbol within this work, not threat, but reminder that space is restless, that preparation must look outward as well as inward, that storms come not only from our star, but from the wandering dark beyond it. In the silence of the visitor and the fire of the storm lay the foundation of new designs. Preparation unsettles because it demands imagination of disaster. To prepare is to admit fragility, to picture collapse before it arrives. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once paired with the storm, it shows how much we must build, how much we must change, how fragile our current shelter truly is. Preparation is both reassurance and burden. It steadies the future, but it weighs the present with visions of what might come. And yet, preparation is also hope. To build is to believe in tomorrow. The storm of 2025, though fierce, did not destroy us, and the preparations it inspired will outlast its glow. The visitor, though silent, left behind questions that will shape defenses and discoveries for generations. Preparation turns awe into action, silence into structure, uncertainty into resilience. In this way, fire and fragment alike become not only events but blueprints, sketching futures where humanity may endure storms fiercer than any yet seen. Still, unease lingers, for preparation is never complete. Each system built reveals another vulnerability. Each shield raised another gap. What if storms grow beyond what we can harden against? What if visitors arrive too suddenly to prepare at all? What if preparation itself breeds complacency, a belief that we are safe, when in truth we are only less fragile for a time? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once tied to the storm, it awakens the endless work of preparation, a labour without end beneath a sky that never ceases to change. 3. Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that preparation is both architecture and prayer, a structure we build against the unknown, and a hope that the unknown will give us time to finish. And perhaps their greatest gift is this, that they forced us to imagine what must be made not only for ourselves, but for those who will stand beneath future skies, inheriting both our storms and our shelters. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only a call to prepare, but a spark for vision? For when the heavens rippled with fire and whispers of 3i Atlas echoed in thought, humanity found itself imagining futures not yet lived, futures where survival was not the only goal, but where awe itself became foundation of what we build. What if storms and visitors alike do not arrive only as threats, but as invitations to reimagine what it means to live beneath a restless sky? Visions have long been drawn from the heavens. When ancient astronomers charted constellations, they saw not only stars but stories, hunters, gods, guardians, reminders that life could be patterned with meaning. Renaissance thinkers, peering through early telescopes, saw worlds beyond worlds, imagining voyages into the unknown. In the 20th century, rockets and satellites transformed those visions into tangible steps, reaching skyward not only for defense but for discovery. The storm of 2025 revived that old current. Though fragile systems trembled, the fire also stirred visions of cities more resilient, of communities living in rhythm with the sky rather than in fear of it. Science joined vision with practice. Engineers spoke not only of shielding machines, but of designing networks that could bend and adapt, glowing with resilience like the auroras themselves. Astronomers wondered aloud whether visitors like 3i Atlas might one day be welcomed rather than feared, studied not as threats, but as teachers from beyond. Even philosophers and poets added their voices, suggesting that perhaps awe itself should guide our future, that in the dance of fire and silence, we might find patterns for living that are not built only on defense, but on wonder. Vision unsettles because it asks us to imagine what has never been. To see beyond survival is to admit that storms will come, visitors will pass, and yet humanity can shape its story differently than fear alone would dictate. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once bound to the storm, it expands the imagination beyond endurance, daring us to ask not only how we will survive, but how we will flourish. Vision demands courage, and courage is always costly. And yet, vision is also gift. It lifts us from the narrow frame of immediate danger into a horizon where awe becomes architecture. The storm of 2025, luminous though it was brief, seeded ideas of a world where human systems echo the sky's beauty, resilient and adaptive. The visitor, silent and passing, seeded dreams of journeys outward, of futures where wanderers are not anomalies, but companions. Together, they nudged imagination from defense to possibility, urging humanity to see storms not as interruptions, but as reminders that the universe is alive, and we are alive within it. Still, unease lingers. For what if visions are only dreams, fragile and impossible? What if the storm's fire inspired ideas we cannot build, or the visitor's silence encouraged hopes we cannot fulfill? What if vision itself is trap, leaving us vulnerable while we dream of futures that never arrive? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because, once paired with fire, it tempts us toward horizons we may never reach, and dreams as fragile as auroras in fading skies. 3. Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that vision is more than escape. It is the seed of transformation. And perhaps their greatest gift is this, that they pressed humanity to imagine futures where awe is not fear, but foundation, and where to live beneath the sky is not merely to endure, but to dream in harmony with the restless light above. What if the solar storm of 2025 was not only a call to prepare, but a spark for vision? For when the heavens rippled with fire and whispers of 3i Atlas echoed in thought, humanity found itself imagining futures not yet lived, futures where survival was not the only goal, but where awe itself became foundation of what we build. What if storms and visitors alike do not arrive only as threats, but as invitations to reimagine what it means to live beneath a restless sky? Visions have long been drawn from the heavens. When ancient astronomers charted constellations, they saw not only stars but stories, hunters, gods, guardians, reminders that life could be patterned with meaning. Renaissance thinkers, peering through early telescopes, saw worlds beyond worlds, imagining voyages into the unknown. In the 20th century, rockets and satellites transformed those visions into tangible steps, reaching skyward not only for defense but for discovery. The storm of 2025 revived that old current. Though fragile systems trembled, the fire also stirred visions of cities more resilient, of communities living in rhythm with the sky rather than in fear of it. Science joined vision with practice. Engineers spoke not only of shielding machines, but of designing networks that could bend and adapt, glowing with resilience like the auroras themselves. Astronomers wondered aloud whether visitors like 3i Atlas might one day be welcomed rather than feared, studied not as threats, but as teachers from beyond. Even philosophers and poets added their voices, suggesting that perhaps awe itself should guide our future, that in the dance of fire and silence, we might find patterns for living that are not built only on defense, but on wonder. Vision unsettles because it asks us to imagine what has never been. To see beyond survival is to admit that storms will come, visitors will pass, and yet humanity can shape its story differently than fear alone would dictate. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once bound to the storm, it expands the imagination beyond endurance, daring us to ask not only how we will survive, but how we will flourish. Vision demands courage, and courage is always costly. And yet, vision is also gift. It lifts us from the narrow frame of immediate danger into a horizon where awe becomes architecture. The storm of 2025, luminous though it was brief, seeded ideas of a world where human systems echo the sky's beauty, resilient and adaptive. The visitor, silent and passing, seeded dreams of journeys outward, of futures where wanderers are not anomalies, but companions. Together, they nudged imagination from defense to possibility, urging humanity to see storms not as interruptions, but as reminders that the universe is alive, and we are alive within it. Still, unease lingers. For what if visions are only dreams, fragile and impossible? What if the storm's fire inspired ideas we cannot build, or the visitor's silence encouraged hopes we cannot fulfill? What if vision itself is trap, leaving us vulnerable while we dream of futures that never arrive? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once paired with fire, it tempts us toward horizons we may never reach, and dreams as fragile as auroras in fading skies. 3. Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that vision is more than escape. It is the seed of transformation. And perhaps their greatest gift is this, that they pressed humanity to imagine futures where awe is not fear, but foundation, and where to live beneath the sky is not merely to endure, but to dream in harmony with the restless light above. What if the solar storm of 2025, with all its fire and disruption, was not only a call to transformation, but a lesson in acceptance? For when the auroras stretched further than memory, and when whispers of 3i Atlas moved again across the human imagination, many realized that not everything can be controlled, not every silence can be filled, not every storm can be tamed. What if storms and visitors alike do not come to be defeated, but to be endured, folded gently into the rhythm of life beneath a sky that was never ours to command? Acceptance has always been drawn from the heavens. When the Nile flooded unpredictably, the Egyptians did not resist, but built their cycles around it, accepting its rise as both gift and danger. When sailors of the Pacific met storms at sea, they lowered sails, trusted currents, and waited not because they loved the storm, but because they understood its inevitability. Even in the Middle Ages, when comets flared unexpectedly, chroniclers often ended their records not with solutions, but with prayers and act of yielding to mystery. The storm of 2025 carried this same thread: power beyond control, light beyond mastery. The visitor, too, reinforced it: silence that could not be explained away, trajectory that could not be redirected, presence that had to be accepted as it was. Science often resists acceptance, seeking cause, prediction, solution. And yet even here, humility entered. Astronomers admitted that storms cannot be prevented, only prepared for. Engineers conceded that no system can be perfectly shielded. In the silence of 3i Atlas, scientists acknowledged that not all answers arrive when summoned, and some questions must remain open. Acceptance did not mean surrendering inquiry. It meant understanding limits, bowing to the scale of forces greater than ourselves. Acceptance unsettles because it feels like weakness. To accept is to stop struggling, to admit that not all power is ours. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once tied to the storm, it teaches us that acceptance is not optional, that humanity must live with the cosmos, not against it. To accept is to sit quietly before the unknown, and silence is often harder than action. And yet, acceptance is also freedom. To accept that storms will come is to stop fearing their inevitability. To accept that visitors will pass is to savor the rare chance to see them at all. The storm of 2025, though fierce, became less terrifying when seen as part of a cycle older than memory. The visitor, fleeting and wordless, became more wondrous when freed from the need to explain it fully. Acceptance is not resignation, it is peace, a quiet reminder that life continues even when control slips away. Still, unease lingers. For what if acceptance becomes complacency? What if we confuse peace with passivity, yielding to dangers that preparation might have lessened? What if storms teach us humility, but we fail to act on it? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once paired with fire, it makes us wrestle with balance, asking how much to accept, how much to resist, and offering no certain answer. 3. Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that acceptance is not defeat, but recognition that the sky is older than us, larger than us, and will outlast us. And perhaps their greatest gift is this, that they showed us the quiet strength in yielding, the peace that comes when we stop demanding mastery and instead choose to live humbly within the endless rhythm of fire and silence. What if the solar storm of 2025, with all its fire, and the quiet passing of 3i Atlas, with all its silence, were not only lessons in acceptance, but seeds of wisdom? For when humanity looked upward and saw both chaos and calm stitched into the same night, many felt that these were not merely events to endure, but teachers in disguise. What if storms and visitors alike arrive not only to unsettle us, but to sharpen our understanding of who we are and what it means to live beneath such a sky? Wisdom has always been linked to the heavens. Ancient philosophers turned their gaze upward, measuring order in the stars and drawing lessons for life below. In Taoist traditions, the balance of yin and yang was often mirrored in the sky's shifting moods, light and dark, stillness and movement. Medieval monks, recording eclipses and comets in illuminated manuscripts, treated the heavens as library of divine lessons, each light a syllable in an unreadable script. The storm of 2025 seemed to echo that pattern, violent yet beautiful, destructive yet awe-inspiring. The visitor, too, embodied paradox, foreign yet familiar, present yet passing. Together, they offered wisdom, not in answers, but in questions. Science translated these questions into knowledge. Astronomers deepened their understanding of the sun's magnetic cycles, mapping new rhythms of fire. Physicists refined models of interstellar wanderers, imagining how many more fragments might one day pass our way. But wisdom is more than information. It is the humility to place knowledge within context, to recognize that facts alone do not quiet fear, nor do they satisfy wonder. Wisdom whispers, storms remind us of fragility, visitors remind us of rarity, and together they teach us to live in reverence of both. Wisdom unsettles because it demands patience. It does not arrive quickly, nor does it promise certainty. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once tied to the storm, it reminds us that wisdom is earned slowly in the long silence after awe has passed. Wisdom cannot be hurried, and it cannot be forced. It lingers, ripens, shapes us without our choosing. To seek wisdom is to accept that questions may remain open longer than lifetimes. And yet, wisdom is also strength. Unlike knowledge, it does not fade with time. Unlike preparation, it does not depend on machines. It is carried quietly, generation to generation, shaping how humanity endures the unknown. The storm of 2025 left its mark, not only on circuits and skies, but on minds, reminding us that beauty and danger often arrive together. The visitor left its wisdom too. Silence can be as meaningful as noise, presence as powerful as impact. Together, they taught that wisdom lies not in conquering mystery, but in living gracefully within it. Still, unease lingers. For what if wisdom is ignored? What if we gather data but forget its meaning, prepare systems but neglect perspective, marvel at the sky yet fail to learn from it? What if storms and visitors whisper lessons, but we turn away, distracted by smaller concerns? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once tied to fire, it burdens us with wisdom, and wisdom unheeded becomes regret. 3i Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that wisdom is not gift, freely given, but treasure, slowly uncovered, requiring both humility and attention. And perhaps their greatest legacy is this, that they offered not answers but perspective, urging us to remember that storms will come, silence will return, and our task is not only to endure, but to grow wiser with each encounter beneath the restless sky. What if the solar storm of 2025, with its wildfire, and the silent passage of 3i Atlas, with its unyielding calm, were not only lessons in wisdom, but invitations to reverence? For when the heavens flare with such majesty, and when fragments drift past unseen until they are already upon us, humanity is pressed into a posture older than knowledge, one of awe, of humility, of respect for forces that can neither be owned nor fully explained. What if storms and visitors alike arrive not to be conquered, but to be honoured, as mysteries vast enough to shape us without our consent? Reverence has always been the first human response to the sky. ancient peoples raised stone circles, altars, and temples toward the heavens, not to master them, but to honor them. The rising and setting of the sun was treated as divine ritual, the appearance of comets as sacred omen, fearful yet holy. In the Middle Ages, monks paused their chants at eclipses, recording them not only as events, but as signs. Even now, when science has charted cycles and orbits, the instinct remains. We fall silent at auroras. We gather to watch eclipses. We whisper when wanderers streak across the dark. The storm of 2025 was no different. Its curtains of light silenced even cities. The visitor, too, was met with hushed tones, a reverence deeper than fear, as if acknowledging a guest we did not invite but could not ignore. Science does not erase reverence, it deepens it. To know the mechanics of a solar storm is not to reduce its majesty, but to heighten it, the dance of magnetism across space, the delicate balance that keeps satellites alive, the improbable beauty of light born from disruption. To chart the trajectory of 3i Atlas is not to dismiss it, but to marvel that we even noticed it at all, that our instruments were keen enough to glimpse a traveller from beyond our neighbourhood of stars. Reverence does not ask us to choose between mystery and knowledge, it asks us to hold both together. Reverence unsettles because it resists mastery. To revere is to admit that not all things are ours to control, that the universe does not bend itself to human will. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once tied to the storm, it reminds us that reverence is the only response wide enough for the scale of what we have seen. Fire and silence alike demand more than curiosity. They demand humility, a bowing of the spirit before forces older than our species, older even than our world. And yet, reverence is not weakness. It is strength of another kind, the strength to wonder without fear, to yield without despair. The storm of 2025 left damage, yes, but it also left beauty that stirred reverence across the globe. The visitor left no scars, no noise, yet its quiet path inspired reverence, just as deep. A recognition that not every arrival must shout to matter. Together, they remind us that reverence is not passive. It is a way of living, of carrying awe into choices, of treating the world and the sky alike with gentleness. Still, unease lingers. For what if reverence fades? What if storms become routine and visitors become overlooked, their lessons buried beneath distraction and noise? What if reverence is forgotten in the rush of survival, replaced again by fear or arrogance? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once joined with fire, it teaches that reverence must be chosen, again and again, or it will slip from us like light fading into ordinary night. 3i Atlas and the solar storm of 2025 together remind us that reverence is the quiet heart of wisdom, the recognition that awe itself is a form of truth. And perhaps their greatest gift is this, that they left behind not only questions or warnings, but a gentle call to kneel before the unknown, to carry humility into every glance at the sky, and to remember that mystery, like light, is not enemy, but teacher. What if the visitor from beyond the stars was never meant to be seen in quiet skies, but in skies already alive with fire? What if 3i Atlas, silent wanderer of the cosmos, passed not through stillness, but through the storm of our own sun, the roaring, unseen tempest that lashed the earth with invisible fire? And what if the solar storm of 2025 was less accident than alignment, a reminder that visitors and storms, silence and flame, often arrive together? And if you'd like, feel free to share in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and what the sky looks like above you as you listen. It's always a quiet joy to see how far this circle of night watchers reaches. What if the solar storm of 2025 and the fleeting silence of 3i Atlas were never meant to be explained, but simply remembered? For when fire spilled across the sky, and when a wanderer from beyond brushed past our world, humanity stood together in awe, suspended between fear and wonder, responsibility and humility. What if, in the end, their greatest gift was not knowledge or warning, but perspective, the reminder that we are small, fragile, and yet endlessly capable of marveling at the vastness that enfolds us? The story of storms and visitors has always been a human story. Ancient peoples told of fire serpents slithering through the night, of omens in sudden stars, of voices carried in winds that shook the heavens. Every age has found itself looking upward, searching for meaning in the chaos above. The storm of 2025 became our chapter in that long tradition, no less extraordinary, no less humbling. The visitor, too, claimed its place unplanned, unpredicted, and yet unforgettable. A fragment of the beyond, reminding us that the cosmos is never silent, only waiting for us to notice. Science will archive it all, solar cycles measured, auroras mapped, trajectories recorded. Engineers will trace the disruptions, planners will prepare stronger defenses, astronomers will refine their models. Yet beyond the numbers, there remains the echo of something quieter, the feeling of standing beneath a sky alive with fire, the hush that followed when the visitor was acknowledged, the sense that we were part of a story larger than our machines could hold. That is what will linger, not in data alone, but in memory, in story, in reverence. Closure unsettles because it feels like ending. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once tied to the storm, it resists finality, leaving us with questions that cannot be sealed away. Why here? Why now? What will follow? Yet perhaps the truest wisdom is this: not every thread must be tied, not every question must be closed. To live beneath the sky is to dwell in mystery, to accept that endings are only pauses in stories still unfolding. And yet, closure can also be gentle. The storm passed, and though it rattled our grids and stretched our nerves, life continued. The visitor drifted on, and though its silence shook our imaginations, the earth remained. Together, they remind us that even in awe, even in fear, the rhythm of life endures, that dawn follows night, that silence follows fire, that stories carry on beyond their moments. In this way, their legacy is not disruption, but continuity. Still, unease lingers. For what if storms stronger than this one await, or visitors more ominous than 3i Atlas one day arrive? What if what we have seen is only beginning, and our preparations, our wisdom, our reverence are not enough? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once paired with fire, it awakens questions that will echo far beyond our time, demanding that future generations look upward, again and again. And yet perhaps that is the truest gift, that in fire and silence, in fear and awe, we were reminded that the universe is alive, and so are we. To witness the storm was to glimpse the restless pulse of our star. To notice the visitor was to touch the vastness beyond. Together, they drew us back to humility, to reverence, to wonder. And perhaps, in the quiet that followed, they taught us that the universe has never been silent. It has always been speaking, softly, waiting for us to learn how to listen.